Hey everybody, it's Dale Jr. back again for another episode of the Dale Jr. Download, and today on the Allied Guest segment, we're going to have Winston Kelley. Winston Kelley was a lead pit reporter for MRN for over a decade, and he now is the executive director at the Hall of Fame for NASCAR. Great stories. They're coming up. Let's get started. The following is a production of Dirty Mo Media. All right, we're back again in the Dirty Mo Media studio for the guest segment today. I want to thank Ally for bringing us the guest segment every single week. They brought us another ally today. Winston Kelley is coming in. I wanted to get Winston here for a while, and it's just not really worked out, but we finally have made it work, and he is coming into the studio to tell us about his life as a broadcaster, how he got into his job as a lead pit reporter in MRN. And, man, I have done a lot of work with that guy over the years in interviews, and we'll talk about some of his most memorable interviews, some of the things that stand out in his own career. But he also took a role at the Hall of Fame many years ago and is the executive director there and kind of the guy in charge, or the guy that ushered the Hall of Fame into existence. I can't think of a better person to have hired for that position. And so, the Hall of Fame and its success is very important to the sport and the legacy of the sport. There's so many stories enshrined into that building and so many inductees in the Hall of Fame and future inductees coming down the line, and we need it to be successful. And I think Winston Kelley was a great decision to be a part of that team and to lead that team. So we'll bring him in the room. We'll get started and see what Winston's got to tell us today. So this is Winston Kelley on the Dale Jr. Download. We've been talking about trying to get you in here. I know you've been busy, and we've finally been able to find time where it works for everybody, and I'm so thankful that you're here today.
It's an honor when I look at the names that have come in here, and I listen all the time, as you know. So it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I have a massive amount of respect for MRN, for all of our radio personalities. I feel like that, the broadcast, whether it's the television broadcast or the radio broadcast, has a massive responsibility to make sure the fans realize and know how good this race is on any given day. And the MRN broadcaster or the television broadcaster has to work to make that happen, right? It just doesn't come easy or naturally. It's an effort. The other thing that's great about a broadcaster, particularly with MRN, is a recognizable voice, which you have. Like when you speak, I know it. I know it's you. Barney Hall also had a recognizable voice, just velvet smooth, and his delivery was so perfect. Squire, there's a lot of, you hear the voice, you know who it is, and you have that same sort of quality. I was reading through the notes. I was really surprised that your career started when it did, because I feel like you had been around so much longer. And as a broadcaster or even a pit reporter for MRN, I feel like that you had been around longer than you had. But let's dive back into your early life. You worked at Duke Energy doing what?
I did. Well, actually, I was in my fifth different career, literally.
What all were the careers?
Graduated in 1979, and I worked in the financial field, budget and accounting and financial management for a number of years. Then I went into an administrative management role. Then I went into a human resources role. Then I went into government and community relations, and then I was moving into economic development when I ended up leaving. And the thing that was great about Duke is, the company was large, and if you put in the effort and you put in the interest and you wanted to learn and do different things, then those doors would open up if you put that effort in. And it was a fabulous company to work for, and it paid the bills, and never worked for but one race fan. When I started doing this, never worked for but one race fan, but they all realized everybody had things outside of the company, and I didn't have kids. So chasing race cars and racetracks was what I did, but had a great 27-year career there.
Yeah. Wow. It's pretty, I had no idea, but is it rather common, at least in those days, for your MRN team to have other jobs and other careers even.
Absolutely. Very few MRN folks, if any, maybe Barney were full-time. It doesn't matter whether it was Joe Moore, who had his own television show, or, Doc Punch when he was on back in the day. He did his work over at the Halifax Hospital, and, everybody that's there. And many of them still do have another occupation. Now, there's more opportunities for radio people like to do Sirius XM and MRN now, but none of that existed. And, when I talked to my father about getting involved, he said, you can't make a living broadcasting races now, so you need to get an education and go to work, and then you can try to do that. So, yeah, absolutely. Everybody had something else, and in some cases it was racing related, and in some cases it wasn't.
Your dad was in broadcasting, so you were entertained and curious about that. Knowing that it wasn't something that you might be able to make a career out of, you still wanted to pursue it due to watching your dad and being entertained by his experiences?
I mean, just like you, if your dad hunts and fishes, you hunt and fish as a general rule. And Dad was the first public relations director at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. When he went into business, he and Mom bought an auto parts store. He started working for Hank Schofield and the Universal Racing Network. Dad had done a lot of PA work over the years, around racing and football and other things. So Hank hired him, and he did turns and pits quite a bit. And we'd tag along, and I would every chance I could get, go to Bristol, go to Atlanta, Rockingham, Darlington with him, and, just loved the sport and the people.
So that Universal Racing Network was, I did sort of a bit of a series called Becoming Earnhardt last year about the 1979 season, and that URN network was the one that prominently covered a lot of the races around the Southeast. And they did cover the 1979 Bristol race that my dad won his first race. So I believe, we don't know where, but I believe that race on that URN broadcast exists somewhere, hidden in some room, in some box, some archive. Because we were able to find a lot of those races from back then and use some of that stuff on that Becoming Earnhardt series, but we're not able to discover the 1979 Bristol race, but it's out there somewhere.
Yeah, Appalachian State University got, that's where Hank donated all of his stuff. Hank Schofield, who ran URN, actually had a printing company in Winston-Salem, which was his primary business. He was the track general manager at North Wilkesboro, and URN was just kind of a side deal for him. And as he was getting older in life before he passed away, he gave all what he had left back in the mid-2000s to Appalachian State.
You also, so when you wanted to get into PA work, so as you're a public announcer basically, you started working for the Concord football team. So that's the Spiders.
That's the Concord Spiders. Dad had done the PA from when it was at the old field before they built the new, and that was kind of part of his community service work, owning Kelley Auto Parts, and had announced, didn't get paid a nickel, just did it every Friday. And when I talked to him about wanting to do radio, he said, well, get some announcing experience. I'd do the second and fourth quarters. He'd do the first and third, and we'd spot for each other. So started doing that in the late 70s.
Yeah. My dad, we're big A.L. Brown. That was a big rivalry, A.L. Brown versus Concord. I don't know if it is still today. I think it kind of is. But a lot of my family went to A.L. Brown, or some of them did, and so that's where you had to have allegiance for one or the other in Kannapolis.
Yeah, in football it was more that way. I played baseball and played American Legion baseball, and we played with the folks from Kannapolis, Central Cabarrus, Mount Pleasant, Northwest. We were big buddies.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same rivalry as it was in football.
Yeah. So you would even continue to do that, though. Once you even sort of established yourself somewhat, you continued continued into the 90s doing the broadcasting for Concord?
I did it as long as I could till the travel got to where I was leaving to go to a lot of races on Friday. But it wasn't unusual, even once I'd gotten on the air with MRN, that, I'd do a high school football game on Friday night and drive to Rockingham, for that race. So as long as I could do it, I did.
Yeah. Your first racing gig, you were working for URN as a statistician.
So So I called Hank. I knew he'd at least take my call because he knew my dad. Dad said, here's his number. I'm not going to call him for you. So I called Hank and said, I'm trying to get just like your dad.
Yeah.
You can relate to that.
Oh, yeah.
And said, I'd like to get involved and eventually broadcast. Do you have anything? He said, well, I need a statistician to sit in the booth and provide rundowns. We didn't have electronic scoring, to provide rundowns to the announcers in the booth, and you would talk to somebody in the scoring stand. And said, okay, I'm in. He said it pays $50 a race. If it's a place like Richmond or Atlanta, we'll get you a hotel room, but no travel expenses or anything. And I was just thrilled to death to get my foot in the door.
Right. You started working at North Wilkesboro a little bit as well.
So as URN's last 2 years of broadcasting was 1981 and 1982. Yeah. We did 11 races in 81, and then we were down to just 2 tracks, of which North Wilkesboro was one, and I believe Darlington was the other, or Rockingham in 82. So when Hank folded up shop and MRN picked up a lot of those broadcasts, because candidly, it wasn't Hank's full-time deal, and he didn't want to invest in the equipment, the remote equipment. So Barney Hall was one of the 2 PA announcers at North Wilkesboro, and I helped Hank in the media center and those things in addition to the URN work at North Wilkesboro. He was a PA guy, and I talked him into letting me be the assistant public address announcer, and then the guy that was the main PA guy left a couple of years later. So, in a moment of weakness, he let me do it in 83, and I did it until it closed down in 96.
Really? So what's the responsibilities as doing PA at a racetrack?
Well, when you show up on Friday, and a lot of it just has to do with telling people what the schedule is going to be. You do promote, the concession stand and things like that. At that track, you could actually hear the announcer call qualifying and to talk about, who's coming out. You don't just talk incessantly, but you're just kind of a filler, remind people here's what's coming up schedule-wise, and then you do all the pre-race activities. You do the driver introductions and those type of things, and then, the post-race interview where the trophy is presented and those type of things.
Yeah. Did you enjoy doing all that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Loved it. Could not wait for the Thursday night before Wilkesboro. We actually had 4 weekends when I first started. It was the 2 Cup weekends, and then there were 2 triple header weekends that they had with late models, modifieds, street stocks, those 2 races, 2 weekends. So I was doing 4 weekends a year and loved it. It was a blast.
Wow. You did a lot of PA work at Wilkesboro, but Bristol and Darlington?
Yeah, that just doing the North Wilkesboro stuff opened some doors through people that I knew or got to know. You know, Barney helped open some doors and got to do Bristol and did that for the longest time. I did that until 2000 or 2002, and then because MRN wasn't doing Bristol, I would do that. And there's times I did both. I did MRN and the PA, and then got to do Darlington and a few others. Yeah.
So has the PA job at racetracks changed much since you were doing it?
Yes and no. I guess it hasn't changed in that you're still kind of a traffic cop. That's your role. Yeah. You're just letting people know what's going on. What has changed is now they pipe in the radio broadcast because the technology is so much better and they're so good. So you're still just a traffic cop. Yeah. You might be the one that got a call that, somebody said, we've got an emergency. Paige, Dale Earnhardt Jr. needs to go and make a telephone call. But trying to do that during the race is a little bit difficult, but it hadn't changed all that much.
You went to the Carolina School of Broadcasting.
Again, just trying to get.
Wait, what did you not think you did well enough?
Well, I've got a Southern dialect, and that's they want more neutral dialects.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, most broadcast outlets don't want, the Southern drawl, even in racing. They don't want that. And it helped me articulate and enunciate things better, but also think about, sometimes you ask me what time it is, I'll tell you how to be able to watch, but how to, keep things more concise. And, it's just more repetition and learning from people who had done it. A guy that had worked at WBTV ran it in Charlotte.
And I'm just curious as a broadcaster myself, so when you go into a school of broadcasting, is it applicable, because I'm sure they're to racing, because I'm sure they're teaching people that want to be broadcasters in anything but a NASCAR race. And so did you walk out of there feel like you'd made some gains?
I think so, because, and again, it was more how you pronounce things and stuff like that. More of the people that went there were looking to be kind of on-air talent that are working in news at a TV station.
Gotcha.
Or working at a radio station. So the play-by-play stuff is not, but the preparation and the enunciation and all that was similar.
You went to a speech pathologist.
I did. Again,
what is that?
Again,
what do they even do?
They help you. They record you, and they help you with how, in the South especially, we can be lazy with our enunciation. An ing, you drop the G off.
Yeah.
And they help you notice things like that. Knowing that I was trying to get into national broadcasting, anything I could do to teach myself how to be better presented, because I wasn't a journalism major like a lot of people are that go through or try to get onto national broadcast.
So did you notice that as you trained yourself to really do better at pronunciation, and did you notice that habit? Did you just claim that habit 24/7 in everything you did, even when you weren't working?
No.
You could switch it on and off?
Well, you just try to be conscious about what the professional speech pathologist had pointed out that, you could do better. So when you're behind a microphone, you're just more thoughtful about the things that you can be lazy and in casual conversation. But, you don't want to be Ronnie Radio and overhype it. That's one of the things I learned from Barney is, you got to be yourself.
Yeah.
Barney could get away with just being himself because he was Barney Hall.
Yeah.
And it was like he was sitting beside you on the couch talking. But here I didn't have, near the background that he did. And, I'm trying to convince a guy named John McMullen that, who had hired people like Mike Joy and folks like that to give me a chance. I'll show you I'll work hard.
Yeah. You finally got a job with MRN in 1987. You were a gopher and helping, tear down equipment and things like that. You ran information for pit reporters, spotting interns for reporters there as well. No pay.
No.
Right. That type of mentality, as far as people will tell you that type of mentality doesn't exist anymore today. Can't imagine. I mean, there are a few eager kids that I know that have done some spotting and some work similar to that to try to get their foot in the door. But man, just I can't imagine traveling and doing all of that and doing all that work and not getting any kind of monetary payment.
Well, I had a job that paid the bills, so I was able to do
right.
it.
So, but why would you not choose to spend your weekend doing other things?
Passion.
Yeah, passion.
I love it. And I'd played a whole lot of softball, and played some golf and stuff like that, but there's nothing that I had passion for like NASCAR racing. And, I didn't look at it, I wasn't getting paid. I looked at it that I was making an effort to be a small part of a sport that I loved and people that I loved being around. And, I was going to give myself a few years to see if I could finally get on the air, but I just loved the people and the sport. And again, I couldn't wait till Friday came, get in the car and drive to, whether it was Atlanta or Rockingham or wherever. I had to go to all the races I could drive to.
Do you remember the first on-air opportunity you got?
Without question.
Let's hear about it.
Without question. So I was scheduled, after almost a little over a year and a half. So I started in early '87 at Rockingham was my first race.
Yeah.
And went to 12, 14 races a year that were all in this area because we had Rockingham, Bristol, all those you could drive to, and I'd either find somewhere to stay or they did occasionally get me a hotel room at places. So, and I was doing PA and just tagging along and learning how things were done. And John McMullen was the president at that time. And he said, I'm going to give you a chance to be on the air at the Martinsville doubleheader, which would have been the end of October. And it was going to be the modified and the Busch Series race. So, you will be one of the pit reporters there. So the Cup race weekend was in the middle of September. So I was going to go to that anyway. And the Saturday Busch race was not being broadcast on MRN. So they were trying out a couple announcers in the turn. And John said, well, why don't you go down on pit road and, while they're practicing with these other announcers, they'll pitch it to you a couple of times to make some reports, just let you get your foot wet, and just see what you learn. So the next day, he came to me a couple of hours before the race, and I had been making my notes to be a pit runner. And he said, you think you're ready to do this? And I said, yes, sir, that's why I've been here. He said, you're going on the air today. Mike Joy was fogged in Roanoke, Virginia, and was not going to be able to get there. And Jim Phillips was supposed to work the back straightaway and Mike the front straightaway. So they put Jim on the front straightaway and gave me a chance on the back straightaway. And I guess I did okay because they invited me back.
Yeah.
But I remember it like it was yesterday.
Do you remember your first report?
The first person I talked to, and I remember in a production meeting, they said, they were talking about who to talk to. And I've told him this story before. They said, let Winston talk to Brett Bodine. He runs well here. He was in Bud Moore's car, and he said he's won other races here. And Brett's nice to everybody, even the new guy. He'll be nice to him. Brett Bodine was the first person I interviewed. And Ricky Rudd was one of the ones that ran good on the back straightaway, and Larry McReynolds was his crew chief, and I probably pestered him to death asking information and all. So those are two things I remember about that.
Yeah. What is it like in the middle of the race when you need information? And we'll talk about some interviews that you might have dreaded doing later in the show, but I want to know, like, I'm curious, I guess, as to what's that kind of pressure like to interrupt a crew chief mid-race?
Well, one of the best things that John McMullen did for me is not put me on the air before I think he knew I was ready, and tagging along with the other pit road reporters, whether it was Jim Phillips, Dick Brooks,
Dick Brooks.
Doc Punch, the different people that worked on MRN. I observed how respectful they were, and when to go into the pits and not. We didn't have radios then that we could hear what they were talking about, but you also got to know the crew members, not just the crew chiefs, and they got to trust you when you were asking if the car was going backwards or forwards, or what's going on, if what's happening with the car. So it's mostly just watching them and knowing when it's a good time and making sure you don't go into the pit or you don't interrupt the crew chief at the wrong time, that you realize that's their office, they're working, and they're allowing us to go in. And NASCAR has more access than any other sport, in my opinion, and it's just being respectful of them and their workspace. And the way I look at it is we're a conduit of information to the race fan. On the radio side, it's the person riding down the truck, this person that's sitting on their boat, that's out mowing the yard, that can't see it. So you're painting a picture, and the crew members and the crew chiefs realize we're a conduit of information. Nobody tunes into the radio broadcast because who's on the air.
Yeah,
they might turn it off because they don't like who's on the air. But if you're respectful of their space and are fair with them, they will be accessible and fair with you.
Some of your favorite firsts and lasts during your career. You were working the Atlanta race for Cale Yarbrough's final race. I don't think we appreciated Cale as much as we should have. We made a big deal out of a lot of people's final events, but I don't remember there being a ton of fanfare for Cale comparable to like a Jeff Gordon under Dale Earnhardt or obviously the King. But what do you recall?
I remember doing the pre-race interview. I think he started mid-pack in the Hardy's car, and Cale was a lot like David Pearson. He wasn't ever rude to the media. He didn't embrace it, or he didn't embellish it, or he didn't need it.
Yeah. But
he was always, once you talked to him, you'd get an answer. But he also wasn't the reflective type of, kind of here's my career. It was. I just remember it was a little bit like another broadcast. But I think you're right. Especially back in that day, a big deal was not made out of people's last race. It probably the first one that a big deal was Richard.
Yes.
In 1992, but with guys, whether it was a Buddy Baker or even Pearson, because Pearson would stick his toe in the water and get back out. You didn't know when his last race was going to be.
That's true.
And Cale was one of the first ones that said, this is it, back in '88.
Yeah. Jeff Gordon's first pre-race interview and his last MRN interview in 2015, you were there for those.
Yeah, so 1990, when he started outside of the first row at Rockingham in the Busch Series race.
That 67 car.
I just happened to be, so Jim Phillips would generally do the pole sitter, and I'd do the outside pole sitter. So it's just kind of luck of the draw, if you would, and being able to talk to him. And then, by the time I'd been around a while, I was lucky enough to get, guys' last interviews, yours, Tony Stewart's, Jimmy Johnson's, and Jeff's. And, I didn't play the seniority card much, but I really wanted to do those. So I was able to do, Jeff's last interview before the race and after he got out of the car. And but the thing that I always tell people about Jeff is he was no different to me or anybody else from that 1990 interview to he stepped out of the car as a 4-time champion. He may have been busier, but he was the same accessible guy, and I vividly remember that.
Do you remember interviewing the Richard Petty, after his crash at Atlanta in '92?
I do. He was standing there watching him work on the car, and he was the same, just kind of matter of fact. It's just. He always tells the story, I was on fire and I saw a fire truck, so I drove toward it. But, he just could not have been nicer. Barney Hall rightfully did the very last interview with MRN when they drove him around the track. Barney came out of the booth and rode around with him and interviewed him, as it should have been. But the only reason I got to interview him then is that he did fall out of the race for a while before he went back out. And it's like, this is the King, and the guy that won the first race I went to, and I'm like everybody else. I was heartbroken that he didn't get to finish the race, but remember that well.
You remember Dad's last MRN interview?
Pre-race interview before the 2001 race, and you guys had raced in the Rolex race, and I'd actually worked the Rolex race, a couple of weekends before. And the thing I remember, and I think it was Andy Pilgrim that he was with, he was going around introducing Andy to all these people and was in such a relaxed mood. That's the one thing I remember, and just how excited he was to introduce Andy to his people, like I guess Andy did with you guys, to Andy's people. And so I just remember that's how he was. He was just relaxed, but more excited, how he'd walk up with people and, he'd say, hey, let me introduce you. I was just watching that, and that's fascinating.
Yeah. Did you interview him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was, I interviewed your dad a lot before Daytona, a lot of different times, because he started first or second the whole 1990s.
Yeah.
And if he won the qualifying race that I was interviewing the second place car. And one of the things I learned about your dad, or at least I perceive about your dad, one year, we could still interview him getting in the car at that, when they were sitting in the car. And I interviewed him sitting in the car at 1 year at Daytona. And when we went to commercial break, I think it was Eli Gold that said, man, that sounds like one tight, round-up race car driver. I said, no, au contraire. He has been so relaxed. And he would walk in front of other people's car, and he'd kind of slide his foot under there to see where their spoiler was, while he was talking to him. He was so relaxed before that race, and it hit me then that all you race car drivers, your button turns at different times. Davey coming to the green flag would be cutting up with his crew. But your dad, when he got in the race car, that's when his focus was there.
Yeah.
I didn't get a bad answer. It just was shorter. Outside of the race car, he was totally different.
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
Yeah. I mean,
is that your perception of it?
Yeah, I think so. I know he would walk around and stick his foot under the front valence of the cars to see where it was on the laces of his shoe, and to be able to tell who had their car higher or lower out on the grid.
He may have taught somebody that.
Yeah, he was smart. You had, worked a lot of different other events outside of NASCAR. You were asked to deliver the eulogy at Bob Labonte's funeral. That must have been quite a tough request, but a heavy responsibility.
It was such an honor, and when Bobby called me, Bobby's a jokester, so Bobby and Terry were together. He called me, and I was in a meeting. I texted him, I called him back, and he called him, and he said, you may have heard we lost Dad, and we're going through some of his stuff, and we found something that he said that he wanted you to do his eulogy. I said, "You're kidding me." He laughed. He said, "Yeah, you're right. I'm kidding you, but we would like you to do it." and where it came from is we had this ongoing joke with Bobby and Terry because how quiet they are. You were around Bob Labonte. Mm-hmm. Bob could be pretty high strung, and he could get pretty wound up. And there's times we interviewed him, and he'd just go off on a NASCAR official. So somewhere Jim Phillips and I got to picking with Terry and Bobby that you slip us a little money for the race, we won't talk to Bob. We just walk up to him, put our hand out, and they'd laugh about it. And gotten to know Bob real well, and Bobby and Terry, and neither one of them are big talkers. And that when they asked me to do it, it's like that. It was really an honor because I love that family to death. Yeah.
You wrote, you've been in the Cop-Hedy charity ride as well. That's something I've never done. I'm not a motorcycle guy, but I do envy the fun it looks like you guys have. One particular trip to catch up with the ride, you and Richard Petty and Jim France rode out together. This was just a couple of years ago. And you've had some memorable experiences like interviewing Richard and David Pearson together and things like that during the ride as well.
Yeah, so the thing with Jim and Richard and Lance Brown, who worked for him, so we were at Sonoma, and Lance and I got to talking about it. I was doing the NASCAR This Morning show, which was a TV show, so the ride's going to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and I'm going to get off the air later than that, and trying to figure out how I was going to work the logistics out, and it worked out sending my bike out with them. And Lance said, well, Richard's got something, so we're going to also catch up with the ride. So this was, a month or so prior to the to the ride. So then, the weekend, I think, of the ride, Lance says, well, Jim France is going with us too. So, man, this is great.
Yeah.
This is something pretty special. So what made that so unique is, as we're going to catch up with them, we went the same route, but we didn't stop as frequently as they did. So a very long story short, as we were going, there's this road in Nevada called the world's loneliest highway, US 50. So between Fallon and Austin, Nevada is about 110 miles. So they stopped in Fallon, and then we're going to stop in Austin, which was about where some of the bikes could go. Well, we had stopped about 30 or 40 miles earlier, go through Fallon, don't think anything about it. And I realized about 10 or 15 miles outside, there ain't nothing out here. I didn't know it was that desolate. And I was the only one that had a CB. So I saw a trucker go by, and we had only passed about 2 or 3 cars at the time. And I said, is there any gas stations between here and Austin? Because 2 of the bikes could make it all the way, and I wasn't sure about the other 2. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get blamed for running Richard Petty and Jim France out of gas. I need to stay out here in Nevada. So this trucker says, yeah, there's a little gas station with a bar and all that about 30 miles down the road. So I'm watching the odometer. And, if we'd have gotten 35 miles down the road, I was going to pull over and we were going to go back because I knew we could get back to Fallon. So right in the middle of nowhere, place I found out later called Middlegate, Nevada, we saw this little building, had an above ground gas pump, pulled in there and got some fuel. And the funny part of it is I went in to pay for the gas, and Lance was getting water, and Richard went to the restroom. And Lance saw these two guys playing pool, arguing about, was that Richard Petty? And we had nothing on racing related.
Yeah.
And they were arguing about it, and they looked over at Lance and kind of shrugged their shoulders, and Lance said, yeah, that was Richard. Said, I told you, I knew it. So Richard comes out of the restroom, didn't know this, so asked for pictures and autographs, and there were 5 or 6 more people that came out from the woodworks, and we later found out that place had a population of about 18 in that little section.
Half of them.
And so it's just a, but when I look back on it, I've got this picture, in my office of the 4 of us at the end of catching up to the ride at the hotel. It's like, that's a heck of a memorable experience.
I bet. Just being on a bike and out in the middle of nowhere and just nothing but your thoughts. That sounds like a lot of fun to me.
I loved it.
What's the rest of the ride like? I've never really had a chance to sit down and ask Kyle about that. I mean, Kyle's experience on the ride is a little bit different than everybody else's because he's kind of the orchestrator of everything. He's at the front of the band, if you will. But what's it like to be in that ride, and what's your experience? What would you say the experience is like for somebody who's never done it?
Well, there's the people part of the experience, and there's a ride part. The people part of the experience is year after year, and I went 5 or 6 years and then go for a while, went a few years ago. It's like you pick up where you left off the year before. I mean, it's like going to Daytona, and you hadn't seen anybody for 3 or 4 months. You just pick up your conversation where it was, and they're just the nicest, down-to-earth people. The ride itself, the logistics are absolutely incredible. So you start out in the morning, you leave your luggage they've got a luggage truck. They've got a ton of volunteers. Some firefighters do the luggage truck. And you leave your luggage, and then each stop is very well choreographed. You might ride a couple of hours, and then they've got a gas stop. And, some years I was on the fuel team that you go ahead and you basically are shutting down a big gas station, a QT or something like that. And you got 8 or 10 people that are there, and every rider comes through. They take their gas tank off, and so you're filling up 125, 130 motorcycles at one time.
Yeah.
You got lunch planned for you at different places. And then, when you get there at the end of the day, you don't check in at the regular check-in place. There is a table that you go, and, Dale Jr., you're in room 202. Your luggage is already in there.
Damn.
So all that stuff is taken care of. And then they've gone to where you have a day off that you just kind of are on your own. But it's just incredibly well orchestrated. There's a lot of fun activities at dinner or afterwards. The one you were talking about with Richard and David, we had a barbecue, I think it was, at a Georgia Pacific plant, which was one of Kyle's sponsors at the time. And the plant workers, participated in it. The riders participated. So that's not unusual that you might have some local folks involved or providing a meal or whatnot. And so they decided they wanted to do a Q&A with the folks. And there were 7 or 8 drivers on the ride. I remember Jeff Green, who you've had on, was driving for the Pettys at the time. Matt Kenseth went on it several times, Terry Labonte, and there's probably about 5 or 6 of them still there. And this guy raised his hand and said, so of just the drivers that are here, who's the best? So I look over at Richard. I said, well, Richard, what do you think? He said, Pearson. I said, David, what do you think? He said, I ain't gonna argue with him. So it's like, okay. And I remember telling Leonard Wood that story, and he said, the thing about it is David believed that. He didn't have an arrogant bone in his body, but he was incredibly confident, a lot like your dad, that if you got him close, he had confidence in himself.
For sure. Summer is finally here, and when I'm thinking of summer plans, it's hanging out by the pool, barbecuing on the grill, and best of all, sports. From NASCAR races to baseball games, there's nothing like kicking back and catching a game with some buddies or the family. FanDuel helps me keep up with the latest action in sports, and all I have to do is open the app and make up any of the bets I'm in the mood for. This weekend, NASCAR returns to Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400. Tune in to Dirty Mo Doe as they evaluate how the return to racing on the oval will shake things up this weekend. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/Dale and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. 21 plus and present in North Carolina. Opt-in required. Wager requirements apply. Bonuses awarded as non-withdrawable bonus bets or profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including bonus expiration. See terms and conditions at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 877-718-5543 or visit morethanagame.nc.gov. Let's talk about Dad. You had a lot of opportunities to interview him, as we mentioned, but you had some tough ones. Interviewing him after Daytona in 90, 91, 93. One particular, I mean, you were dreading the interview in 1990. Talk about, talk about that particular interview, but also that's your job. You got a job to do, and I've seen it in broadcasting as, watching our pit reporters work. We've got, working at NBC, we had some amazing opportunities to work with some incredible people, and there's some new talent coming on. Kim Coon's been doing it quite a few years now, but Dylan Welch, and they all are put in these positions sometimes where you're going to interview somebody who's not happy, and there's a question that you have to ask this person that they don't want to answer. And now this person's Dale Earnhardt in front of you.
Well, if you think about it, we're the only sport that you get to talk to somebody immediately after they have lost. Mm-hmm. Either they're coming out of the care center, and, when I first started, I was interviewing, people that finished second, third, fourth, fifth, and some of them were happy, some of them were not, obviously. So 1990, everybody knows the story. He led, I think, 155 out of the 199 laps. And I'm standing there thinking, I'm going to interview Derek Cope. He is going to be thrilled to death. And they bring him to the gas pump at that time. And I knew Derek fairly well. We had actually dated roommates at one time. And, he was a catcher playing in baseball, and I was. So, we weren't tight, but we knew each other. I thought, man, Derek's going to be so excited. And then Alan Bestwick loses his mind when your dad, runs over the housing, I think it was, and blows the tire. And it's like, oh, my God, he's going to want to bite the microphone off. Yeah. So he comes into the garage area, and the older garage area, and I'm standing there beside the car as he pulls in and takes the window net down. And it may have already been down. And the person, that worked with the team at the time comes running up while I'm standing there waiting. Back up, give him some room. Give him some room. And your dad, how he sits in the car, he looked out there. And remember, this is 1990. I'd done my first broadcast.
You was only a couple years
MRN in 1988. Yeah. I'll show you a picture of interviewing your dad when Taylor couldn't have been more than a year old. Got one of those. And he looks out and he said, tell Winston I'll talk to him whenever he's ready. And so it's a minute before we come down there. He goes ahead. He gets out of the car. And about this time, some more media's coming up around him, and we're standing toward the back of the car. And he looks at the media. He says, guys and gals, if y'all go sit on the bench, you remember those wooden benches that were in the garage area? He said, you guys go over there on the bench. NASCAR needs to get to the car. You go over there, and I'll talk to you as soon as I'm done with Winston. Then he looks at me, and you know how he can kind of pick at you. And he said, y'all ready to do this? And I said, well, he just went to Victory Lane and talked to Derek. He says, Derek, heck, I'm the story. Y'all need to be talking to me. And then he gives me that grin from under the mustache, just like, okay, so far I'm okay. And then could not have been a better interview. And then, he I don't remember which order TV was in that whole deal. And then he went and talked to everybody else. It's like, wow. I mean, that just blew me away. And in 91, Dale and Davey got into an accident late in the race. It may have even been the last lap. Yeah. And when I got to the garage area and they had driven in there and they were out and they were just comparing notes, doing the hand gesture and here's what happened. And again, could not have been nicer or more accommodating. 93 was a little different. 93 is when he had led a lot of the race, and Dale Jarrett passed him, and I don't think it helped matters, and that Jeff Bodine was one of the ones that gave Dale Jarrett a push, and it's been well documented that there was not a love lost there. And I talked to your dad at the gas pump, and I asked him 2 questions, and I got 4 words. Both answers were "got beat." I was like, okay, I know we're done here, and that's fine. He's whatever I asked him, he said "got beat," and left me with the perception is your dad wasn't a bad loser. Nobody likes to lose, and nobody hated to lose more than him. But when he felt like it was totally out of his control, it was very different than whether it was somebody else helped beat him or he could have done something different. That was the perception I was left with, that when he was shorter is when he thought he could have done something different versus nothing I could do about it.
Yeah. There was another opportunity in 93 when you were interviewing Dad when Rusty throws the water bottle. J.R. Rhodes and a couple other people were in the middle of that scrum. What do you remember about that?
So I remember that Rusty, or your dad, ran into Rusty early in the race.
Yep.
I went back and looked at it because I thought it was earlier than it was, but it was somewhere, around lap 45 or 50.
Rusty and Dad had been talking. Rusty came on the show, and Rusty had been talking with Dad at the start of the race. They were both recognizing that Jeff Gordon was going to be something they were going to have to deal with, and long term. And so they felt like that, at Bristol, between the two of them, they would decide not to, give each other a hard time, and they were both going to team up and give everything they could to Jeff Gordon. And so race gets going, and as soon as Dad pops Rusty in the back end, sends Rusty in the wall, and Rusty's like, "What the hell? We were, we were not going to do that. We were going to, try to, run Gordon as hard as we could, and here you are." It's almost like Rusty felt like Dad lied to him, and took advantage of it. And so it seemed like he showed his frustration after the race. But what was that like being down there?
Yeah, I did not know that part of the story. I just knew doing the radio that Rusty had 450 laps to be mad, and he was mad. And they took the cars to second place finish and third place, and I think your dad finished second, to the gas pump. And we're just standing there beside the window of the car where he'd gotten out, just talking about the race, matter of fact. And all of a sudden, I felt something that felt, like it started to rain a little bit, and like something bounced off the hood of the car. I didn't hear anything because I had headsets on, and then, it either whizzed by or bounced off your dad's shoulder, and we both kind of stuttered. And then he looks over, and on the right front of the car is Rusty, who was expressing his displeasure. And we're in the middle of the interview, and I went back and listened to it, and I kind of stuttered and stammered trying to explain what was happening, but it frustrated, it frustrated or scared me, not scare, but it's like startled me. What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to do? And your dad, he's first responding to Rusty and trying to explain what happened, and Rusty was having none of it. So then Dale's going to walk over there and talk to him and try to explain what happened, and people are trying to stand between them, thinking it might be a little bit physical. Could get physical, but I don't think the two of them would have gotten physical. They just weren't that way. But I remember Rusty saying, "I hadn't forgotten Talladega," because it was the same year that he had gotten into it. That's the one thing I remember, but I just remember how it startled both of us. And then it was, a normal heated on Rusty's side and trying to explain on your dad's side. But, being in the middle of the interview and, had only been doing this 3 or 4 years, I had never experienced anything. And that's one that gets brought up to me a lot. What's the most unusual one you've ever had? And that's probably, at the top of the list.
Is it?
Yeah, I can't think of any that were totally different out of context.
Yeah. Well, Barney Hall had an unfortunate accident where he got hit by a motorhome leaving Richmond in 1990. There's a little note here about Dad giving Barney a call at the hospital. Barney was an amazing guy, and I think that for you, he kind of was a mentor.
He was an incredible mentor. I mean, he taught me so many things. We could do a whole story, a whole section on Barney Hall and how, he's one of the 2 or 3 most trusted people that's ever been in a garage area that carries a microphone or typed on a typewriter. He's just that way. It
was true that he was a bit of an agent before they were agents.
He would be the guy. So, if Sterling Marlin wanted to talk to Junior Johnson or vice versa, we didn't have agents. And, Sterling wouldn't want, I'm using that one as an example because of all the deals Barney did, he took them all to his grave. As close of friends as we became, and I never asked him, but, he just would not go into that because he was that trustworthy to them.
Yeah.
And that's just one that kind of comes to mind because, Sterling went to work for Junior, that if Sterling was interested in talking to Junior or vice versa, they tell Barney, just talk to him, see what his contract is, if he's interested in talking or not. So if he went up into Sterling's hauler or Junior's hauler, nobody thought anything about it.
Yeah.
But, back then, or even now, but especially back then, if they walked into each other, people would see them talking. So he would be the one that the driver or the car owner would go talk to see, are you even interested in talking? So he would do that. And, your dad and Barney, were very good friends, very good friends and, incredible trust for Barney and for each other. And so we're leaving the racetrack at Richmond. I think it's 1990, if memory serves me. It's a really cold race. And you know how Laburnum Avenue is out front of the racetrack. So there's 2 lanes going one way, 2 lanes going the other. And we parked across the street so we could go the other direction to go to the airport. And there's a median
Still
there.
do it that way.
Yeah. So there's a median there. And, a bunch of us had walked to the median and some of us had gone on. And Barney and Jim Phillips were a little bit behind us. And what happened is they had a counterflow lane. So there's 2 lanes that would normally come this way. The one closest to them that would normally be coming right to left, they looked right and didn't see anything. They didn't think to look left. And as soon as they walked out, they walked into the side of a motorhome.
Oh.
If it'd been a little bit earlier, they may have been under it.
Right.
But they literally walked into the side of the motorhome, and we're standing there at the car, and we didn't hear it, but we look around. Where'd Barney and Jim go? And looked, and people were starting to gather around. They're laying in the road. So they got taken to the hospital. Both of them had a couple of broken ribs, and one of them had a collapsed lung. And
Jeez.
I rode in one ambulance, and I think it was Eli rode in the other just to go there with them. So what Barney tells the story is, and he told us this several weeks later, said the nurse came in that night and said, Mr. Hall, there is a gentleman on the phone that is just bound and determined to talk to you and will not take no for an answer. And I've tried to tell him several times that, you're under anesthesia and all that. He said, will you answer, will you try to take his call? And Barney says, he's kind of groggy and said, yeah. And he said he picked up the phone. And the first thing he heard is somebody say, how in the hell do you call 400 laps of racing and you can't see a GD motorhome? And he said, I'm, a little bit stuttered and And he said he repeated it. How in the hell do you call 400 laps of racing for all over the world and you can't see a damn motorhome? What's wrong with you? And he said he's still a little bit, kind of stuttering and stammering and foggy. So the next thing he said, hey, it's Earnhardt. I think he called him something else.
Yeah.
He said, hey, idiot, it's Earnhardt. How are you? And, he kind of was coming around and told him, he said, do I need to send my plane to go get your mama and Karen's his girlfriend, his mom? Do I need to send my plane to come take care of you?
Yeah.
Classic Dale Sr.
Yeah.
He's going to give you a hard time, but he will do anything for you, but he didn't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah.
You've probably heard thousands of those stories. But, when Barney told that story, no way he'd make it up.
Yeah.
But Dale wanted to send his plane if he needed.
I know they were I know they were close, and I know Dad thought the world of Barney, and everybody thought the world of Barney, but Dad was really a big fan of his. It says that and I'd never heard this, but Kelly might have mentioned it. I can't remember, but Kelly's name, her spelling, Kelley, is the same spelling as obviously your family name. Was there some connection there?
I found that story out when I was here and we were in the green room, which was your apartment up above where we're sitting right now, for the announcement of you going to Hendrick Motorsports. Never heard that story, but we were up there. I don't know if you were in the room yet or not, but I know, Kelly was. I'm pretty sure your mom was standing there, and we were just chatting, and I have no recollection of how it came up, but Kelly told me that one of the names that your mom and dad agreed on for her, and I don't know if they knew it was a girl or not back then, if you knew that information in advance, but she said one of the names they agreed on was Kelly, and that your dad said he wanted it spelled like the store in Concord, not because it was Dad, but because he liked the spelling and it was different, most Kellys, or Kelley. And he said he liked that, and he said if we go with that, he'd like for it to be spelled out. And I'd never heard that story until we were making that announcement. So, that's something your sister Kelly and I have talked about from time to time, which just a neat family connection we had no idea existed. But
that ain't the only connection. You used to deliver parts for your dad's store, and you deliver to Robert G's, and my dad apparently had a line of credit over at the store.
Yeah, my dad loved your dad and knew Ralph pretty well too. Yeah. Dad was a little bit younger than Ralph, but he knew Ralph real well from that, him promoting. Dad promoted a few races, but he did a lot of PA work and, just knew Ralph and thought the world of him as a driver and as a person. And same thing with your dad. And your dad, would buy parts for his late model car. And, Dad said, it might take a while, but he said, I wasn't worried about it. And if he never paid me, I didn't care. But he said, he eventually got paid for everything. And what I remember delivering to Robert G's store more than anything, so, we would, in the summers run the delivery truck. And even before I was 16, he let us ride along with him some just to get some work experience and I guess get us out of the house from Mom's standpoint when your grandfather had the shop that was on the Speedway property up on 29. And I think the stuff I remember delivering to him were paint supplies as much as anything, the strainers and the different colors and things like that. And, I didn't realize what it was at the time, but, Robert G had the best looking race cars that showed up at the racetrack. And to look back and say, hey, some of Dad's paint might have been on there, but I remember that. I think it was a little two bay, wasn't it? 2 bays for that garage and just, delivering paint and, he'd sign for it and all that. So, small world. You
had a couple opportunities to do some stuff with me. You were the MC, as you mentioned, for the announcement here to go drive for Hendrick Motorsports. You were also a big part of our announcements and even the Victory Lane interview around the number 3 Wrangler car that we raced in the Xfinity Series at Daytona in 2010. Obviously, big part of helping me get inducted into the Hall of Fame, and we've done a dozen interviews or more than a couple hundred interviews maybe on pit road and after races. What are some of the most, I guess, memorable moments that maybe me and you shared?
Well, one of them was that one in 2010. So we did the announcement out in the in the circle out there with the partnership with Hendrick and DEI and Childress and all that. And then it was in honor, among the things, it was in honor of your dad's induction into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in the inaugural class in 2010. And the car looked exactly like Wrangler, had one of the Hall of Fame stickers on there that was just for your dad, that was different than our sticker, that was something that we had worked to have on there. And I remember the Victory Lane interview, because when you got out of the car, you looked more relieved than excited. Yeah, because it's like you were expected to win because you're Dale Earnhardt Jr. You had won so many speedway races in Cup and in what was in the Nationwide Series. So at first you look more relieved than anything. So we always go to commercial right after the race. We weren't doing Victory Lane interviews out on the racetrack then. And, TV goes first and then radio. And then during the commercial break, Barney Hall says, be sure to tell him his dad would be proud. I will never forget, so I asked you 2 questions about the race, whatever it was, who you had to hold off. And because I think you had to come back a little bit up through the field. You had a dominant car, but you had to make some passes, as I recall. And then the last thing I said, Barney Hall said to be sure to tell you your dad would be proud. And you started to get emotional and change the subject. You said something about Barney Hall, and then something about me, and all that. But I didn't mean it to get you emotional. But for Barney Hall to say that about your dad, it's like I can't not say that.
Sure.
So I remember that one well.
We we had the opportunity to work together several times at the Hall, and I wanted to talk to you about your decision to go there. You got encouraged to apply as executive director of the Hall of Fame. Who encouraged you?
Well, so if I back up just a little bit, so I was a very, very small part of the team from the Charlotte area that was making the pitch for the Hall of Fame to come
be
here.
there.
I was not one of the leaders, didn't come up with a business plan or all the finance, and I worked on the marketing and communication team. And, kind of my role was to make sure that things were accurate and realistic related to NASCAR and whatever perspectives I could share about the NASCAR industry. I emceed the announcement that we were going to go after the Hall at Hendrick Motorsport, emceed the announcement in 2006 that it was coming here. And somewhere in that process, somebody mentioned to me in passing, would I ever think about working there? Would it interest me? And I said, never thought about it, never crossed my mind. I have a great job at Duke. I had just started that economic development job that I had at Duke as part of a merger with another company. And so I got moved into another role, and it's like, okay, here's another good opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I got encouraged by the person that was running. Our parent company is called the Charlotte Regional Visitors Authority. So the guy over that encouraged me and reached out, if I was interested. And Mark Dyer from NASCAR was one of the lead people from NASCAR that did the process. And Mark ran the Charlotte office and just said, we'd be interested in talking to you. And I thought, well, I got a job I like, so it's not as hard to interview for the job. But I'd never done a resume. Even when I got out of college, I had to call somebody I used to work with. I didn't want to call anybody in HR and Duke to help me with a resume. So I called somebody I'd worked with to help put a resume together and, put in an application. And I also remember we interviewed right the week after the Coke 600, and I was leaving the driver's meeting. I was there. MRN wasn't doing the race, but I was there just going to see the race, and I think I may have been helping WSOC radio. I can't remember that. So I'm leaving the driver's meeting, and Humpy pulls me off to the side, and he says, "Don't F this up." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Don't F this interview up. We need somebody that knows NASCAR in this job." So they offered me the job after the series of interviews. They obviously interviewed some other folks, and it took me a while to accept it. Not because I knew nothing about museums, knew nothing about building museums, running museums, building a building, operating, and I had such a good job at Duke, and I'd been offered other jobs full time in NASCAR, and did not leave.
What other jobs?
I'd been offered a job at NASCAR to work as a part of a team that would – so I had an HR background, and it was to help work with the officials on what I was told that you've got. And it was a verbal offer. I never got an official offer, but somebody said, if I offered you this job, would you take it? And I was really on the precipice of getting promoted to a vice president at Duke, which is a big deal at a company like that. But they had part-time people, full-time people, and contract people. So to work on policies that help with that. And, I decided where I was. And if I'd have taken that job, I just started doing the TV show, NASCAR This Morning, and was still doing MRN. We couldn't work for NASCAR and do that.
Yeah.
So just, put everything together. But going back to the Hall job, the things that I had not done, kind of intimidated me. But also, yeah, I took a pretty decent pay cut. Base pay, it wasn't as huge cut, but I had a lot of incentives, short-term, long-term, and stock options. But the more I thought about it is how many little boys grow up and not just work with their childhood heroes, but get to know their childhood heroes and be a part of building a facility that honors their childhood heroes and their favorite sport in their adopted home city. And it's like, I knew I would look back and regret it.
Yeah. Atlanta, Charlotte, Daytona Beach, Kansas City, and Richmond all responded to partnering to bring the Hall of Fame to those cities. Who was the toughest competition?
Well, they narrowed it down after they did the initial interviews and looked at all the everything from location to different business parts. And I always got asked during the process, why would it go anywhere else? There is a very legitimate reason it could have gone to any one of those 5 cities, whether it's geographically. Sprint was based in Kansas City. It's in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
Richmond is near more of the population than all 5 cities if you look at how the Northeast is. But they got narrowed down to Atlanta, Daytona Beach, and Charlotte, and then that was in the fall time frame. And then NASCAR made the decision. They did what was called a lockdown. I was not a part of all this, where the NASCAR folks and the city folks talked through what would the business parts of the deal did in February, and ultimately made the announcement in March of 2006.
So it was announced in 2006. So you began working there in August of 2006. The hall was built and designed from 2006 to 2010. All right, so you're working for the hall while it's being built. It takes a long time for that to happen. Literally, I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting is the timeline of you starting your job at MRN. You're the lead pit reporter starting in 2003, right? It feels like you'd been around forever, which, I mean, you'd started in 87, 88, but it just seems like you'd always been in our pits. You'd always been on every broadcast for all these years. And but the lead pit reporter role was finally yours in 2003. You get hired just a few years later in 2006 to take over the Hall of Fame, which is a hell of a responsibility. You're the shepherd of our history, right? And so that's got to, which I know you understand the responsibility, but that's a lot to take on. Outside of pit reporting, had you aspired to be anything more at MRN?
No.
Why not?
I loved what I was doing. I just did not want to go into that part of the business. It wasn't anything against it. It was in, David Hyatt and I, who ran MRN for a while, we started as Gophers about the same time, and he was interested in on-air stuff, and he moved to Daytona on the business side and still did some announcing and decided he'd go that route. I didn't want to leave this region. I had a great job at Duke.
But did you ever want to go in the booth off pit road?
No. And the reason is I had done some turn reporting.
How was that?
I liked it, but I wasn't good at it like the other guys. There is a cadence.
Yeah.
You've
passing the baton, man.
You've been up
amazing.
There with Bagley and Dave Moody and those guys. I did a half dozen races or so on and off. I did some booth work on some of the Xfinity broadcast when they would rotate people into that.
Do you feel like so the MRN broadcast is completely different than the television broadcast? Me and you, I mean, you've worked the pits, you've worked the broadcast, you know it as well as anybody. But is the individual, for the people listening, is the individuals in the booth, they're basically just another turn reporter. They're just in a different location because there is a little bit of traffic cop, where they've got to bring you back and to commercial and so forth. But as the cars circle the track, it's just like a baton passed from one guy to the next, and then it eventually gets back around to the booth and then back to the turns. And so you found that to be just not in your wheelhouse.
I was the play-by-play and the cadence, and I listened to it. I had to be honest with myself that, I felt like I did pretty well on pit road. I love the strategy. I love talking to the crew chiefs, crew members, drivers, and all that stuff. But when I did the play-by-play, and then I listened to the other guys, whether it was a Joe Moore or Barney Hall or Dave Moody, Mike Bagley, you just go down through the list. I didn't have that cadence. I felt like I was the weak link if I did the third turn at Pocono, if I did the third turn or 11th turn at Watkins Glen, some of those. And the traffic cop part, I felt like I picked up reasonably well in the interviewing the people that came into the booth, but I did not feel like I was a strong suit there, and I liked what I did, so I didn't feel like it was something I should push somebody. Having been in management for years and years, you got to get the right people in the right job, and I was not the right person for the booth.
I find that interesting because, Barney was the best, but he never had Bagley energy. The turn workers, Bagley is an excellent broadcaster, and his energy is exactly where you want to be as you're passing that baton around the racetrack. But every time it came back to Barney had his style, and it was a slower pace. It was a little less energy, but it worked. You don't believe that if you wanted to, you could have adapted and found your lane? I think you could have. I think you're too hard on yourself.
I appreciate that, but again, I look at it in comparison.
Yeah.
Because, when many of the jobs that I'm responsible for hiring for over the years at Duke and here, you have 2 or 3 candidates, and you're looking for very small differences because you have excellent candidates at this level. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about putting somebody in the booth, you have people that are excellent at something that I would have to work hard at. As if I were responsible for making the decision to put who I put in the booth, I wouldn't put me in the booth, and I wasn't going to put them in that position to just because I've been around a long time.
Yeah.
Let me try to do it.
Yeah.
So I never had that desire. Just I liked what I was doing.
What takes up all your time today?
Meetings.
Yep. But where is your sole focus?
There's not one sole focus, and I've gotten that question before, and it's a harder one to answer. But if I don't know the specifics of what Kelley does, but my perception is the types of things we do are very similar, that it's our job to help provide the resources to the people on our teams.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of corporate stuff that I work on in support of our team. Employee development is a big thing. Early on, it was getting people to understand the NASCAR industry and how it worked. But we've got a lot of people on the staff that know the industry, and I'll never forget. I got asked by one of our announcers once, when we were having breakfast, and one of my Hall of Fame team members was with me. Said, "Who runs the Hall of Fame when you're not there?" I said, "The same people that run it when I am there." Because they're the ones that open the gates and all that. So I see myself as a person to help provide resources, to be an encourager, a cheerleader, and see what they need and how I can help support them. And, I get involved in some of the detail stuff of, like when we worked with you on our Glory Road.
Yeah.
That exhibit is one I'm very interested in. But, so many of the exhibits, like we're getting ready to unveil one on Hendrick's 40th anniversary and did one on Harvick and his career. I connected the dots between our folks and Harvick.
Yeah.
Jesse and I talked to get it going, but I don't do the detail work.
No, sure. That's exactly what I see you as you're the trusted person that's going to reach out. That I say we, but like the drivers and owners and all of these people that are celebrated in the Hall of Fame are eager, comfortable to discuss anything with you. You've already built this reputation and relationship through your work at MRN and all the interviews we've did together. That anytime you want to talk to me or you want to speak with me, I know that I can have a conversation, a comfortable, trusting conversation with you. I think you're perfect for that role as sort of the custodian of the Hall of Fame. At least that's how I see you. But do you see yourself doing this for a really long time. How long do you want to be in this position?
God, that's a great question. You know, I enjoy it a lot. We've got a couple of projects we're working on now that are very important to me that got put on pause because of COVID. Mm-hmm. We've got a new CEO in our parent company who I really enjoy working with and being able to, you know, help in that transition. You know, he doesn't need me, but, you know, I want to help where I can. And our education program, our events program are, you know, growing, and we don't have enough space for that. So we're just hiring an architect to help us with how we can modify some of the space. But, you know, so I really don't know. I don't, you know, I'm be 67 next month. So I'm not a young man. Yeah. And, you know, the thing I would say is we have a great team. If you know, I hate to say it this way, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I wouldn't leave. But if I get hit by a bus, we've got a great team. So I want to work on some of these projects and transitions, but I don't have a time frame. Yeah. But at some time, you know, you got little kids, we got grandkids. I want to spend some more time with them. Did you have
a plan or a game plan for how you would wind down your broadcasting career?
I knew it would be the right time, and I started thinking about it in the 2015, 16, 17 time frame. And you know, there were a lot of you guys that I wanted to be there as you went out. You know, I said, very lucky to get to grow up and work with my childhood heroes, but then this generation of people that came through this sport with me, mm-hmm. you know, folks like yourself and Jeff and Jimmy and folks like that. It's like, God, I don't want to leave. And, you know, there's still some out there when I left, you know, Martin, I think the world of. He's not a big talker, but I love talking to Martin and people like that. But so, you know, I started thinking about it. And then, you know, in that 2016, 17 time frame, and then when Alex Hayden moved to the booth, which I thought was a great move for MRN, you know, I wanted to give it another couple of years as people, you know, Steve Post was on pit road, but there were some others coming in to get experience. Kim was one of them who's come along and done a great job. So I started figuring about 18 or 19, but that's also when, you know, my wife had her first granddaughter, and they treat me just like, you know, I'm their grandfather. So that it just felt right that it was the time to not travel as much.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you what were a couple of your more memorable interviews. You mentioned that the water bottle incident with Dad and Rusty was one that you'd never forget, but I kind of wonder if I even think that way. Maybe you don't. I don't look back on my broadcasts and go, man, here's 3 memorable moments, but I do know that I was very proud of a few days work that stand out. So, you know, what is some of the moments in your career that are memorable to you?
Well, I always enjoyed either first wins or a win that had not happened in a long time, or a win that seemed appropriate, or excitement in them. And, you know, if I sat down, I could probably list 30 or 40 of those, but some that jump out. One was when Terry Labonte won the 2003, what was then the last Southern 500. Yeah. You know, I'd gone on Terry's motorcycle ride, and like we talked about with Bob, and you know, we had the jokes back and forth with them. But for him to be, you know, one of the old school guys to win the last one, and he wasn't one of the favorites, and you know, he didn't get out exuberant. You know, Terry, that one I remember. You know, I remember the 2003 one at Ricky Craven, you know, his exuberance, and Kurt coming and talking to him. I remember your 2004, I think it was, Phoenix, and I don't know why you were so excited. You'd have to tell me, and I think it was the second Phoenix race, didn't you, win in 2004? Yeah. What was you just seemed a different level exuberance.
We had just gotten our teeth kicked in at Martinsville. We were kind of in the points battle, and we broke a yoke on the rear end. Or we just had some mechanical issues at Martinsville that cost us a chunk of points. And it was really one of them things where it was kind of it sucked, but it was out of our control to a point to have a part failure. And we went to Phoenix and dominated and just had a really great car. And I think it was a I think I was just happy to say to the industry, we are a contender and we're championship material, right? We're not going to win it this year, but even while we're not really necessarily a factor anymore, we're going to, win in one of those races when you kind of lose that, when numerically you're kind of out of it. Winning one of those final races is a great sort of, not an FU to the series, but it's a bit of a, we're not going to let the contenders win these races. We're going to win them. But plus, I think it put us at 6 victories for the season, which in my mind, I thought, winning one race or trying to win at least a race a year was what I hoped to do during my career. But man, not many people could go in and win a half a dozen races in one season. There's not a long list of drivers that'll do those things. And I was having a hard time measuring up to Dad on paper, statistically. So it was cool to be able to do things that I thought he was capable of doing.
I knew I wasn't dreaming, but that helped. I appreciate that context because it's that type of win that I remember. Your 14 Martinsville win.
Yeah.
You wanted to clock so bad, and you were so excited. Jeff's win in his last season at 15 to go to the championship, and Jeff, if I remember correct, you were holding Jeff off, who could have gone to Miami and raced for a championship, and teammate or not, you were going to get that clock.
Yeah.
And then same thing with Jeff the next year. So those type interviews where somebody just are enthusiastic or your dad beside you. I did a bunch of championships. I did yours in the Busch Series because Jim would do the Cup Series, and I remember your dad just being so proud, and some of those championship interviews when just the euphoria of a Martin Truex Jr., Tony Stewart in 2011 with that battle. There are so many of those, and it's not personal. For me, there's some of you guys I've gotten to know better than others, but I look for, a good race, good exciting race, and when that euphoria and even emotion comes out in victory lane, or it's something special, tied to that win, are the ones that it's like, that was cool that I was able to be here, and hopefully I ask a question that the guy that's sitting on the boat would want to know the answer to. You tell me about the race, that's great. But if I can come up with something that, that brings out that what made this special is, again, we're the conduit of information.
I know you won't publicly shame anybody, but I do want to know who might have been the tougher interviews. Who was consistently difficult or hard to crack?
Kowicki could be difficult.
Really?
Yeah. Alan could be difficult if I think Paul Andrews, I haven't heard his whole episode. I think he would tell you Alan wasn't the easiest guy to work with, and I had 2 guys I went to high school with that worked with him that so, and I didn't ever interview him in victory lane. So I was always talking to him. He didn't win, or he fell out of the race, or something like that. So he could be a little bit that way, and there were times that Kyle Busch, would want to walk off or whatever. And one of the things I learned from Barney, if they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. That's fine. I'm not going to force the issue, but so I guess those are a couple that and there are times though, not with Alan because I never did interviewed him in victory lane. But one of the things that I try to pay attention to even before I was at the Hall is, where does this victory stack up? So, one of the things I would mention with Kyle, who he had just passed, whether it's Lee Petty or whomever. And, when I would mention it or it would come up, he kind of had that look like, that's what you're supposed to do. And like he kind of enjoyed it of knowing kind of where he stacked up, that you just passed this Hall of Fame or whatever. So, but when he didn't win or thought he should have won, sometimes he could be a little bit short.
Who were some of the best interviews?
Oh man, golly, that's like saying you got 6 grandkids or 15 grandkids, and who's the best one? The access, and this is not a patronizing, the access that we get is by far and away more than anything we could ever imagine. Think about, Jeff and Jimmy were just so consistent no matter what happened. They were always good. You were always incredibly open, incredibly accessible no matter what happened. You knew even when you had that period of time where you weren't having the success, you had a responsibility because of being the most popular driver and being who you are, and we're always accessible, whether it was before or after the race. And I never had to worry about that you would not talk to us no matter how good things were going or how bad things were going. Tony could be funny.
Tony Stewart,
yeah. Tony, would needle you on the air or something, or walk by you and maybe gooch you while you're interviewing somebody.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
there are a couple of stories that are probably a little bit longer than I got time for, but one, he was sitting in his car in Victory Lane in Daytona up on jack stands. It was the second race. And I couldn't tell if he didn't see me. I was standing up at the corner car. I couldn't tell if he didn't see me or he didn't want to talk. So in Daytona, if the cars were on the back straightaway, you could actually, speak to somebody. Mm-hmm. So I pointed the microphone. I said, Tony, you want to talk? He looked at me out of the corner of his eyes, and he said, no uncertain terms, no, I don't want to talk. And then he looked back and grinned real big. He said, it ain't personal. It grinned. And I gave him a thumbs up, and next week or two when I saw him, I said, Tony, I'll never throw you under the bus, but I've got a responsibility to ask, and if it's a bad time. And he was sitting in a car, winnet down, helmet off, and sometimes that means they're okay to talk. And he said, the thing that I'm trying to do is not say something I won't regret. He said, we blew up at Daytona, and we got involved in somebody else's accident at Talladega in this race. He said, if I finish 15th in all three of those races, I'm leading the points. He said, I was just trying not to say anything I wasn't going to regret. He said, you and your guys have always been respectful. But when he looked back and said, it ain't personal. But he could get you too. I asked him a really poorly worded question once at Talladega. So how you guys, some guys, I don't think you ever did it much, would ride at the back.
Yeah.
And I was trying to ask a question about what is his strategy today, and how he's going to approach it. And I didn't word it very well. And he looked at me. He said, I think I'm going to just ride around here in the back, and if I get a top 35 finish at the end of the day, I'm going to be happy with it. He just looks at me and leaves me hanging. It's like, I probably deserve that. And I like that about that they feel confident enough in you that you can have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I suppose. You've had some great moments with some Hall of Fame inductees, and that's one of the incredible experiences for you, I think, at this part of your career. It's almost maybe very rewarding for you after all the effort and time that you've put in to be able to interview all of these people, be a part of their lives, work the beat in the circus that NASCAR is, and now be in this position to position all of these very deserving individuals into maybe the greatest place they could ever want to be, and that is the Hall of Fame. So, I experienced a lot of championships with my father, watched a lot of drivers go through our sport winning titles. Even though I never won one, I got a pretty good idea of what that might feel like. And nothing in my life, and I don't believe it, I believe it's consistent across the board, can compare to the moment of standing up there and accepting the induction into the Hall of Fame and giving that speech. And I feel like that must be pretty emotional, but also very special for you to sort of be the guy that helps that happen for everybody. I talked about how you developed this reputation and friendship and trust as your work as a pit reporter, and just always being there and being around and being so kind. And drivers want to trust the media, want to trust journalists, want to trust reporters and broadcasters, but it has to happen over a period of time, and I don't know anybody that did that better than you. And now you're in this position where you literally help the individuals in this sport that have accomplished so much settle into that most important position as a Hall of Famer. I want you to spend the last few minutes of our interview just acknowledging that moment and what that must be like for you to watch people get to celebrate that, how eager you are for every single group to come around. I can't imagine how you might, be counting the days to the next induction to be able to get that experience again with a whole new batch of deserving inductees.
It gets emotional. You noticed it at your induction when we talked afterwards so I also acknowledge if we lost anybody. And at your induction, we had lost Jack Ingram and Maurice Petty. And, all the living inductees are friends in different ways than others. And that gets emotional. But what I will tell you, probably the thing that I am not proud of personally, but the fact that the team that we have has that trust now from people. I worked with you some, but you and Tony Mayhoff and others worked with you much more than I did, whether it's Kevin Schleischer, Wendy Belk, Tom Jensen, and just a host of team. And one of the things that has meant the most to me, so you came on your show after your induction and talked about the Hall of Fame weekend. And you said you weren't sure why it was going to take 3 days, but you understood afterwards and appreciated, and that's a cadence that we have worked on with NASCAR. And this is a true great partnership. This is not Winston. There's so many people that have input into this and that make it work, and so many other people that do so much more heavy lifting than I do. We all worked on it together to build it and said, you just liked how it was cadenced out. But the other thing that you said that meant so much to me, that you said how much passion our people have and how much it means to them to do this for you guys. And it's true. And how much of that passion I transferred to them, or they just have it because they care about what they do. Well, I've never told you this. So, we do parent company all team meetings about 3 or 4 times a year. And the whole company is involved in this. Volunteers that are ambassadors that take people around, that help with every aspect of it. We played that for the whole team. The people that do the food and beverage, because we do a pretty good meal.
Yeah.
We played it for the whole team because it meant that much. And that's where I get just so much satisfaction and appreciation for the team that we have. And I appreciate you saying that to folks. And there are individuals that I have been closer with over time, yourself being one of them, that it really meant a lot. I've never voted for anybody because they were personal friends.
Sure.
I can honestly say that. I didn't vote for Terry Labonte the first time he was eligible, but I look forward to when he was getting in. But, there's a ton of different ones that speak to the people. Richard Petty, when we talked about what car we might put on Glory Road, he said, what we got in the collection, you take what you want. First time I ever talked to Richard about the Hall of Fame, he said, please be sure to tell the Petty Enterprises story, not the Richard Petty story. Wherever you think I fall into that.
Yeah.
That's why the hat we just unveiled is about the story. The time walking with Mr. H around the week of it, and he said, I've never taken the time to stop and reflect. And this has given me that encouragement to do that, and all the people that mean so much to him, and watching him with one of his grandsons at his exhibit. And when Ned Jarrett was announced to go in the Hall of Fame in 2011, never forget this, walked up to congratulate him. He says, I want to make you a good inductee. I said, Ned, this is about you. But you know how Ned is. Yeah. When Richard, who normally didn't stay around after the voting, but when he thought his brother might get in, and to be able to be there and congratulate him. And, so many of those, it's about the people.
Yeah.
Fred Lorenzen's kids never saw him race. Never, ever saw him race. When they rolled him into the Hall of Fame to see his exhibit in a wheelchair, and there were 40 people at least on either side, and Chris and Amanda got to see, they gave him a standing ovation, and they're literally got tears in their eyes. They're, the families of the inductees, when all the Earnhardts were up there together for your dad's induction, I tell people all the time, if you've never experienced an induction and you're working here, you can watch the inductees, but they're going to be, oh, shucks, that's just what I did. Watch the families.
Yeah.
And they're, with, Chad and Jimmy's kids this past time and Donnie's family, it's just, you go on and on.
Yeah. I love it. I've, I think as I get older and I go to more and more of those functions, I fall in love with it more and more every year and look forward to it. And when we got inducted, there's a little dinner that you guys have the night before where we go upstairs, and it's kind of like an intimate, there'll be the inductees, and some of the other Hall of Famers, and maybe some wives and family and so forth. But we're all in this room. It's really only about 20 people maybe, and it feels incredible. I don't know how else to describe it, but being in that moment, knowing that tomorrow they're going to be Hall of Famers, and they're going through that 3-day process, and they're sort of bewildered and taken aback, and it's fun to it's almost as much fun experiencing that 3-day weekend as an inductee. It's almost as much fun watching now, seeing other people go through it, and you get reminded about the emotions and the feelings that happened for yourself watching someone else go through it again. And I just can't say enough about the great job that y'all do, not only to make the induction as special as it should be, but also that the place is there. It's every single day, any day that you want to go and learn about the history of our sport, the doors are open and there's a place for us to go. We really never had that. I remember going down to Talladega and to the museum there and being that if I was going to go to Talladega, which I went quite a bit with Dad, you had to go in there because that was really the only form of a Hall of Fame that we really had as a sport. And now to have this official, brick and mortar location right here in our backyard where it belongs, right down the road for any one of us to go to any moment we want, take our kids to, and have events. We've just recently had an event with Nationwide Insurance over there that was so much fun. So anyhow, I'm just so thankful that you decided to take that job back in 2006. I can't think of anybody better suited to usher that whole project into the world and to be the shepherd of it and to help people understand that all the people that you have underneath you that are responsible for putting on the ceremonies and all the other events that happen there throughout the year, you were the perfect person for that. And so I'm thankful. I appreciate you. I'm thankful for the time you give us today. Had a lot of fun talking to you and catching up, and always enjoy being able to see you when I do. But I'm thankful that you came here today to give us some time.
Well, you're kind. I appreciate being here, and I can't thank you and the industry enough, and I can't sing the praises of the people, not just at our team, Amber Wells and everybody at the NASCAR team, Mike Helton, Steve. It's a perfect partnership, and I'm just a very small part of it. The city having the vision to bring it here and to go after it, NASCAR to put it here, and the industry. And Mr. H led, the local effort. There's so many people, and I see myself as one small part that's just so blessed. And everything you just said is why I said I know I'm going to look back and regret it if I don't be a part of this.
Yeah.
And just Gary mentioned having, surround yourself with people. I was fortunate that people, embraced me and surrounded me, our parent company, the city, NASCAR. I didn't build the team. I was a part of building a team, and just so blessed. It's my passion, our sport. I mean, we call it our sport, our house, and it's your sport, my sport.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, buddy. Winston Kelley on the Dale Jr. Download. All right, that's a great conversation with Winston Kelley, and I've been talking about trying to get him here for a long time, so thankful that we could get him here and talk about the Hall of Fame. He's the executive director there and was a longtime broadcaster for MRN, and just some pretty cool stories about how he got his start, some of his memories from being the lead pit reporter for MRN, and great to see the emotion, that he has for his role at the Hall of Fame and how important all of that is to him. And we're lucky that we have somebody who cares so deeply about the Hall of Fame and all the people that'll be inducted there in the future of the Hall of Fame. We're very lucky. He's got a great team around him, and I've had the chance to work with him many, many times, and just always walk away really thankful that that group's the ones that are in charge over there. So good times. I was surprised he was a little more transparent about some of the questions on who the tough interviews were, and stuff like that. I wanted to kind of get into the voting process for the Hall of Fame, but I'm not saying I'm critical of it, but I'm just curious as to some of the protocols and why they do some of the things they do and how they choose who might be part of some of the voting committees. Because sometimes, for myself, for example, I'll get an invite to come and be a part of one part of the process, and then the next year maybe not an invite at all, and then the next year maybe a part of the voting of another whole different process. So they kind of mix and match and try not to, I think they try to avoid redundancy, I guess, in how they do things, so that trying to truly get the most organic group in each in each class each year. So I don't know, it's everybody's got their opinions on how it goes down and who should be in. I think that probably is the toughest job for him. I guess we should have asked him that. Like, how do you handle the aftermath, the criticism? Oh man, why didn't this person go in? Oh, this person belongs in there. Because I'm part of that. We're all part of that group. We're all always on Winston's case about, hey, why didn't this person go in? But they do such a tremendous job, and I wouldn't want that responsibility at all. So, anyways, I appreciate Winston giving us some time today. I'm thankful for Ally, our sponsor of the guest segment. They brought us an Ally today in Winston Kelley, and no matter what you're saving for, whether it's race tickets or a car, maybe a race car, or a new home, we're all better off with an Ally. All right, it's time for the white flag. Dropping Sunday night, the Teardown with Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi, covering everything from Pocono. And also on Monday, Actions Detrimental with Denny Hamlin. Denny giving us his point of view from second place this weekend. Door bumper clear. Guys giving us their opinion on the 7 and 8 accident during the Cup race, and everything else going on in the sport. And yesterday we did the same, dropping Dirty Air on Tuesday, and then today Speed Street with Connor Daly and Chase Holden. Tomorrow DJD Reloaded comes out. It's back again after a little break last week. And Dirty Modo with Steve Letarte and Tampa Tims. You'll want to hear those guys preview the upcoming race. I don't think anybody does a better job previewing the upcoming races than the guys on Dirty Modo. We got an Apple review to read for you. This is from Captain Stud.
Sounds like it.
All right, yeah. Captain Stud. I listened to both parts of the Gary Nelson interview twice. It brings me back to the good days. I like it, man. Appreciate the review. That was to the point, short and brief, and that's the way we're going to end this show. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Winston Kelley. We'll see y'all next week. Check out Dirty Mo Media on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram.